Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was directed by André Øvredal. I probably just mispronounced that name though because of the way that it is spelled. But this film is also being touted as a Guillermo del Toro production for the fact that he was a producer on the film, in addition to someone who received a writing credit for having crafted the story. Most people know him for crafting stories that, have imaginative creatures and have horror elements to them. And so it makes sense for him to take the original Scary Stories in the Dark trilogy by Alvin Schwartz and adapt them into some kind of film. With this, they chose not the route of doing an anthology of short stories turned to film. Instead, they crafted a whole entire new story that is inspired by short stories from the original book, in which we follow a group of young teenagers in 1968 who, on a Halloween night, decide to raid this haunted house that's in their town and try to explore it a little bit. The girl in this group discovers a book in the basement in which there are many different scary stories written in there in children's blood, but because she has a fascination with horror-themed stories, she takes it with her, and then soon afterwards they discover that the stories that are written in this book manifest themselves in reality. For what it's worth, I think this premise is a very intriguing and creative one. It kind of feels like an amalgamation of It and Death Note in a way, but I was willing to go with it, especially because I am a huge fan of the original books from Alvin Schwartz. In fact, I still own a copy of the Scary Stories Treasury to this day. I always loved these books as a kid. They're kind of instrumental in me developing a fascination and a deep appreciation for horror. How can you not appreciate these ghoulish drawings? Look at them!
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it! I want all of you to look at it!
Looking back, it probably wasn't the smartest idea from my elementary school to carry the books in the library's inventory. But I appreciated them for what they were, and later on I got that copy that I still own today. And even now, I like looking back at those stories and checking out Stephen Gamble's seriously disturbing but incredibly inspired drawings. Because of the fact that I was raised on those stories, I really wanted to see how the creative team could take them and appropriate them in a new art form. And the result is definitely a mixed bag, but there are things to appreciate here. The best aspect of this film by far that no one could argue against is how well the visual effects artists were able to take Stephen Gamble's original drawings and be able to create them into real-life creatures. They're so incredibly faithful to Gamble's vision, especially with characters like Harold and the pale white woman with the long black hair. I think those two particular characters are extremely faithful to how Gamble envisioned them on the page. And I like that this film does well to take characters like that and additional ones to not only give them a horrifying presence and a tangible one in the story, but they also just feel kind of gross and dirty. And while you're fearful of these creatures, they kind of give you just this underlying feeling of body horror and just repulsion from what you're seeing. This is coupled very well by the fact that they use a lot of practical effects and minimal CGI here, in addition to André Øvredal's very good use of the camera here. For the most part anyway, André Øvredal is able to position the characters in the frame to where they really do have a terrifying presence on screen. And I think the best example of how he's able to take these original characters and appropriate them into the big screen is the scene involving the pale woman with the black hair. Some of my favorite horror films implement creatures that the characters in the film can't ever avoid. A great example of this would be like the creature in It Follows that shapeshifts and just is constantly following the lead character in that film. There's a sequence involving the pale white woman with the black hair in which the character in the scene who we're supposed to root for literally can't escape from it. And the way that they pan to certain angles, cut to different reactions of the main character trying to run from this thing, is truly chilling. And I love the use of red color in the scene. And yeah, it's just incredibly well done sequence. And there are multiple ones in the film that slowly build up tension and ramp up the horror to where it delivers in a satisfying way in the end, but isn't overly dramatic. The payoff is satisfying there, and it leaves you with just kind of this gross, disgusting feeling at the end, but not so much to where you're going to feel overwhelmed. Other aspects of the film I could definitely key into would be the fact that the performances in general are pretty good. A lot of these actors have to deal with some very cringy dialogue at times, but for the most part, these performers are able to do well to move past that and to give enough vitality and life to their characters. I think the best example of this would be the actor in the film, I can't remember his name right now, who is a dodger of the Vietnam draft. A lot of this has to do with the fact that his character possibly has the greatest depth and personality to him, and he has the most impactful arc in the film. When you have a character that has more material than others, it would be easy for an actor to be able to assume themselves into that role and to do more with it. The rest of the performances are serviceable at best. Like I said, they weren't really given the best material to work with. Some of the attempts at humor in here are just painfully bad. And in general, I just don't really think these characters are really written well to the point where I could get invested into the journey that they were experiencing. The sequences are fun, sure, and I like the overall vibe that this movie has, but for me, a horror movie is best effective when the story is on point. And I talked about this in my Midsummer review as well. I feel the strongest tension in a movie and the greatest fear for the characters when the story gives me reasons to care about them. Most of the characters here are given one definable character trait, and the rest of the movie doesn't do well to develop them to where you get a sense of who they are, what their weaknesses are, and there's just very stagnant characters that are mainly there to either be the one who's supposed to die next, or the one we're quote-unquote supposed to root for. This film mainly felt like it was just trying to recreate certain sequences from the books in real life versus telling a cohesive story that acted as good connective tissue between those sequences. Not that this movie's boring or anything. I mean, for a film that has a 110-minute runtime, which is uncommon for horror movies like this, it does move along at a decent pace, and there are never really any scenes that drag. But otherwise, those sequences are filled with bad writing, a lot of horror movie cliches. Despite the good horror sequences that are in there are also a good number of jump scares as well that are set up in such an incredibly predictable way that once they happened, there was nothing there because I expected the jump scare to happen. The best are the ones that are unpredictable, that catch you off guard. Heck, I jumped more at the scene in The Lion King where Nala jumped out at Timon and Pumbaa. As a whole, Scary Stories in the Tell in the Dark is doing something ambitious, and I appreciate what the filmmakers were doing, but there honestly wasn't enough here to really make me feel as if people should spend their time watching this. If you perhaps have someone in your family who wants to get into horror movies but isn't really wanting to get into the more intense and bloody stuff yet, I would say this might go over well with them. I mean, you never know. It's worth a shot, though, to at least introduce them to the genre, and especially if they're fans of the books, they might appreciate that aspect as well. As a whole, though, I find this to be a very underwhelming and disappointing horror film from someone who really loves this genre. With that, I am giving Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark a C. As far as an age recommendation goes, I would say that this is best for young teenagers. Older kids who go to this movie, sure, they might be able to appreciate it because this movie is never overly violent or gruesome, but there is enough death and actual violence here that feels tangible to where I don't think people who are too young for these stories will be able to handle what they're seeing. But otherwise, there's not really that much language at all or sexual content. It's mostly just the tension-filled sequences and the violence that might make it less palatable for some. So with that, I would say this is probably best for people who are at least 13 years old. Thanks again for watching another one of my videos. I have more planned out shortly, so please check those out in the next few days when they come. Otherwise, if you appreciate this content, please like and subscribe. It really does help me grow my content here. And in addition, you can check out my Facebook, Letterboxd, and Instagram pages that are linked in the description below to see things there that you wouldn't normally find here on my YouTube channel. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good one.